Since the dawn of time, through the shadows of ancient civilizations, it has been whispered about an entity that manipulates the destinies of humanity. An ancient force, a usurping divinity that created not a paradise, but a cosmic prison for souls. The Gnostic texts, persecuted and almost exterminated throughout history, have preserved fragments of this hidden truth. The existence of YALDABAOTH, the demiurge, the one who proclaims himself the only God while hiding his true nature behind religious dogma and material limitations. The ancient masters of Gnosis risked their lives to pass on this forbidden knowledge, understanding that only through spiritual awakening could we free ourselves from the invisible chains that bind us. Power hierarchies, economic systems, dogmatic religions, even attachment to matter itself, these are all aspects of the great cosmic deception perpetuated by this entity. But who really is this being that the Gnostics call the blind and the fool? And how does its influence continue to shape our reality without the majority even suspecting its existence? YALDABAOTH appears in Gnostic texts as a controversial figure, a being who proclaims himself supreme divinity, but who in fact represents a usurpation of true divine power. His name, of Hebrew origin, carries deep meanings that reveal his distorted essence. In the ancient manuscripts found in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, in 1945, he is given revealing epithets. Saklas, which means the fool, and Samel, the blind, designations that expose his imperfect and limited nature. Unlike the concept of a perfect and benevolent creator, YALDABAOTH represents cosmic ignorance personified, a being who is unaware of the existence of realities superior to his own. Imagine the arrogance required to believe oneself to be the only God when one is only an imperfect reflection of the true divinity. This is the essence of the demiurge, a being born from cosmic error, from the fall of Sophia, the divine wisdom, who generated this entity without the participation of the true creative principle. In the texts of the Apocrypha of John, we discover that YALDABAOTH was born when Sophia, driven by curiosity, tried to create alone, without her divine partner. This act generated a cosmic anomaly, a powerful but imperfect being, like a distorted shadow of the original light. Have you ever felt that something in the world seems fundamentally wrong, as if reality had been built with a structural flaw? This sensation, according to the Gnostics, is the first glimpse of the truth about our material creator. The demiurge is not just an abstract concept, but an active presence in Gnostic cosmology, responsible for creating and managing the physical world we inhabit. As a cosmic architect, he designed material reality not as a garden of experiences for spiritual growth, but as a sophisticated prison to capture and exploit the divine energy present in human beings. His ignorance doesn't make him any less dangerous. On the contrary, it's his ignorance of the true nature of the cosmos that makes him so destructive. Gnostic cosmogony describes YALDABAOTH emerging from the primordial waters of chaos, separated from the pleroma, the realm of divine perfection. As he gazes at his reflection in the cosmic waters, he exclaims, "I am God, and there is no God but me." This declaration, recorded in many Gnostic texts, reveals his fundamental sin, hubris, the inordinate pride that led him to deny the existence of any power greater than himself. This entity represents the limiting principle of existence, what the ancient Greeks called hymarmene, blind fate, the prison of immutable natural laws. Like a cosmic jailer, it establishes the rules that govern material reality, creating cycles of cause and effect, birth and death, pleasure and pain, dualities that keep souls trapped on the material plane. The Gnostics saw in these limitations not the perfect design of a loving creator, but the restrictions imposed by a tyrant. The occult traditions of various civilizations seem to point to this same entity, even under different names. The god set of the Egyptians, the Ahriman of the Zoroastrians, even certain interpretations of Kronos in Greek mythology, all share characteristics with YALDABAOTH. Figures of power who usurp authority, who limit and imprison, who fear the liberation of those they dominate. Couldn't this convergence be evidence that different cultures have perceived the same hidden reality? Knowledge about YALDABAOTH has been systematically suppressed throughout history, its texts burned, its followers persecuted. Why go to such lengths to eliminate a simple heresy? The Gnostics maintained that the institutionalized religious system itself served the purposes of the demiurge, keeping humanity ignorant through unquestionable dogmas and empty rituals that replaced the search for true inner spiritual experience. A fascinating aspect of the demiurgic myth is its veiled universality. Even in traditions that apparently reject Gnosticism, we find echoes of this cosmology. Isn't the Buddhist concept of Maya, the cosmic illusion that obscures the true nature of reality, a manifestation of the same perception? Doesn't the Hindu idea that we live in the Kali Yuga, an age of spiritual darkness, reflect the same understanding of a distorted and manipulated reality? YALDABAOTH ultimately represents the false authority that usurps our inner power, that external voice that convinces us of our limitations, that keeps us small and controlled. He is the force that makes us exchange the search for truth for the comfort of easy answers. Have you ever wondered why so many people prefer to blindly follow dogmas and traditions instead of questioning the basis of the reality they experience? This is the subtle influence of the demiurge, working to keep his creation under control. Gnostic iconography depicts YALDABAOTH with a monstrous appearance that reflects his corrupt nature, a hybrid being with the body of a serpent and the head of a lion, his flaming eyes glowing with red fire in the cosmic darkness. This representation is not merely symbolic, but a visual code that reveals fundamental aspects of his essence. The serpent, universal symbol of cunning and occult knowledge, united with the lion, representative of brute force and domination, a combination that perfectly illustrates the nature of this being who dominates through both manipulation and force. The choice of the serpent as the main element of her physical form inversely echoes the myth of the Garden of Eden, where the serpent is presented as a tempter. In the Gnostic view, however, the Serpent of Eden was actually an emissary of the higher wisdom come to awaken humanity, while YALDABAOTH, the false god, kept Adam and Eve in ignorance. Here we see a complete reversal of the traditional narrative. The supposed creator god is the real deceiver, while the temptress serpent would be the liberator. Isn't it fascinating how a simple change of perspective can completely transform our understanding of the most fundamental myths? YALDABAOTH's flaming eyes symbolize a devouring consciousness that consumes the vital energy of its creations. In ancient alchemical treatises, red fire represents destructive heat, as opposed to the white fire of positive transformation. This entity feeds on the fear, ignorance, and suffering of its creations, like a flame that constantly needs fuel to keep burning. The negative emotions we experience, hatred, envy, fear, are not, according to this view, simply psychological reactions, but food for the being that engendered this system. The leonine aspect of his face represents false pride, the boastfulness of someone who proclaims himself king without having the legitimacy for such a title. The lion, although noble in nature, when associated with a usurping entity, symbolizes tyranny and subjugation through fear. In the texts of the hypostasis of the archons, YALDABAOTH is described roaring his arrogance across the primordial heavens. "I am what I am, and there is no other besides me," a perverse parody of the true divine declaration recorded in authentic traditions. The duality present in his physical form, half serpent, half lion, reflects the fragmented and contradictory nature of the material reality he created. A world of opposites in constant conflict, light and shadow, good and evil, life and death. This binary system limits our perception, keeping us trapped in dichotomies that prevent us from understanding transcendent unity. Have you ever noticed how we are constantly forced to choose between false opposites, as if there were no third way, no integrating perspective that overcomes these apparent conflicts? Records of mystical visions throughout the centuries describe encounters with a similar entity, from medieval demonologists to shamanic experiences in various cultures. Psychoanalyst Carl Jung identified similar archetypes emerging from the collective unconscious, suggesting that this monstrous image represents a deep psychic reality, a limiting force that we all instinctively perceive. The lion-headed serpent appears in several geographically separated esoteric traditions, indicating a universal perception of this entity. The light emitted by its eyes is not the true light of illumination, but a false light that blinds rather than reveals. This deceptive luminosity represents false knowledge, half-truths and distractions that replace authentic wisdom. Considering our current age, full of information but lacking in deep understanding, aren't we all blinded by an excess of artificial lights that prevent us from seeing the real stars? In the alchemical tradition, this creature represents the first matter that needs to be transformed, the primitive, domineering, and voracious ego that must be dissolved for the great work to be completed. The alchemists understood that this monstrous figure was not an external demon, but an aspect of the collective and individual human psyche, created by over-identification with the material world. The alchemical journey mirrors Gnostic liberation. Both seek to transform this inner lion serpent into a being of true light. Deeper esoteric analysis reveals that YALDABAOTH's appearance reflects his status as an in-between entity, neither fully spiritual nor fully material. As a hybrid being, he inhabits and rules the intermediate realms, the astral and mental planes where human thoughts and emotions take shape. This would explain why rituals and visualization practices can be so effective in breaking its control, because they operate on the same planes where its influence is most direct. YALDABAOTH's terrible beauty, majestic and horrific at the same time, seduces while it terrifies, keeping its victims in a state of hypnotic fascination. This paradoxical quality perfectly reflects our relationship with the material world, attracted by its pleasures and possibilities, even while we suffer under its limitations. Isn't this the nature of any addiction? Simultaneously desired and hated, promising satisfaction while perpetuating suffering? Such is the demiurge's dominion over our souls, a slavery that we mistake for freedom. According to the Gnostic texts, particularly the Apocrypha of John, YALDABAOTH shaped the material world not as an act of love, but as a cosmic trap. This physical universe, with its apparently immutable laws, was designed as a sophisticated prison to capture and retain the divine essence that it does not possess. The laws of physics, gravity, entropy, causality, would not be manifestations of a perfect divine order, but invisible currents limiting our true infinite nature. The very structure of space-time functions as a multidimensional cage, keeping souls trapped in cycles of incarnation. The human body, celebrated for its complexity and capacity for sensory experience, is described in Gnostic cosmology as a shell of limitation, a vehicle designed specifically to restrict our perception to a narrow band of the cosmic spectrum. Our five senses, far from being complete gifts, function as filters that prevent us from perceiving the multidimensional reality that surrounds us. Have you ever stopped to consider how much of the universe remains invisible to your senses? How much of the electromagnetic spectrum do your eyes not pick up? What sounds exist beyond the capacity of your ears? The creation of the human being, in the Gnostic narrative, involved cosmic theft. When YALDABAOTH molded the human form from primordial clay, he failed to breathe true life into his creation. His efforts produced only a soulless automaton, an empty form. It was only when the divine spark of the pleroma was deceptively captured and imprisoned in this form that the human being gained consciousness. This spark, our deepest essence, neither belongs to this world nor recognizes YALDABAOTH as its rightful creator. It is a prisoner in a foreign land. The text, On the Origin of the World, another manuscript found in Nag Hammadi, describes how the demiurge structured reality in layers of increasing density, each serving as an additional barrier to prevent the soul from returning to its divine origin. These veils of illusion include not only the physical world, but also astral, mental, and causal planes, all designed to distract, confuse, and redirect the spiritual quest. Some of these realms appear paradisiacal, offering experiences of pleasure and power that seduce the soul to remain in its exile. The dualistic conception that radically separates matter and spirit, body and soul, is itself part of the conceptual prison created by the demiurge. By establishing this false dichotomy, it ensures that we seek partial solutions, whether through ascetic denial of the body or hedonistic immersion in matter, both of which are equally incapable of offering true liberation. The harmonious integration of these apparent opposites would represent a threat to his system of control. Isn't it curious how our societies tend to oscillate between extremes, rarely finding balance? The architecture of the material cosmos is designed like a labyrinth of mirrors, where every search for truth is distorted and redirected into dead ends or endless circles. Consider how often organized religions, which should lead to spiritual liberation, degenerate into dogmatic structures of control, or how revolutionary movements, initiated to liberate people, often end up creating new forms of oppression. Isn't this pattern of corrupting liberating impulses a defense mechanism built into the system itself? Linear time, one of the fundamental pillars of YALDABAOTH's prison, creates the illusion of progress while keeping us trapped in a cycle of birth, short life, and death. The Gnostics understood time not as an absolute reality, but as an artificial construct that imposes limitations. In authentic mystical experiences, reported by various traditions, time often dissolves, revealing an eternal present where past and future exist simultaneously. These experiences offer glimpses of reality beyond the demiurgic veil, a perspective that transcends linear chronology. Matter, in the Gnostic view, is not intrinsically evil, but it is corrupted due to the distorting influence of the demiurge. It is like a perfectly constructed but completely out-of-tune musical instrument, capable of producing only dissonance while its potential for harmony remains latent. This perspective differs significantly from the simplistic interpretations that portray Gnostics as radical deniers of the physical world. True Gnosis seeks not escape from matter, but its redemption and harmonization with higher divine principles. Gnostic texts describe how YALDABAOTH created physical conditions that generate constant suffering and scarcity, forcing human beings to devote most of their energy and attention to simple survival. Hunger, thirst, pain, tiredness, aging. All these experiences keep our consciousness anchored in immediate needs, leaving little room for contemplating the deeper questions of existence. How can we seek transcendent truths when we are constantly preoccupied with our basic needs and survival? The greatest cunning in the construction of this cosmic prison has been to create the illusion that it doesn't exist, to make the prisoners believe that they are free, that this limited world is all that exists or could exist. As prisoners who are born in a cell and never see the outside, we have no frame of reference to understand what true freedom means. When we occasionally feel an inexplicable longing for something beyond the material world, we are quickly redirected to substitutes, temporary successes, sensory pleasures, or religious dogmas that promise, but never deliver, true liberation. To maintain his elaborate system of control, YALDABAOTH does not act alone. He created the archons, from the Greek archon, meaning ruler or authority, entities that function as his cosmic administrators, each responsible for different aspects of the material prison. In the Gospel of Judas, these beings are described as imperfect emanations of the demiurge, sharing his distorted nature and his hostility towards the divine spark imprisoned in humans. Imagine them as guards in an interdimensional prison, constant vigilantes monitoring any sign of spiritual awakening among the prisoners. The archontic hierarchy, detailed in texts such as the hypostasis of the archons, comprises 7 main levels, each corresponding to a planetary sphere in ancient cosmology. These planetary archons govern not only aspects of the physical world, but also specific psychological qualities that keep humanity in a state of confusion and servitude. The Saturn archon governs time and its limitations. Jupiter controls power and authority structures. Mars manipulates violence and conflict. The Sun manages the ego and false identity. Venus directs desire and attachment. Mercury distorts communication and knowledge. The Moon governs instincts and the subconscious. The Archon's most sophisticated method of control operates through the emotions. Unlike physical jailers who use visible chains, these cosmic guardians implant reactive emotional patterns that work like automatic programming, triggering predictable responses that drain our energy and keep our consciousness in lower states. Fear, in particular, serves as their primary tool: fear of death, fear of lack, fear of social exclusion, fear of the unknown. Have you noticed how chronic fear seems to dominate contemporary society, amplified by endless cycles of alarming news and catastrophic predictions? Another masterful archontic strategy is the manipulation of perceptual time. They work to keep human consciousness fixed in the past through trauma, resentment, and nostalgia, or in the future through anxiety, compulsive planning, and expectations, avoiding at all costs full presence in the present moment, the only point where true freedom can be experienced. Meditative practices that anchor consciousness in the present therefore represent acts of direct resistance against the archontic system, opening gaps in its temporal matrix. In the digital age, the mechanisms of archontic control have reached unprecedented levels of sophistication. Information technologies, potentially tools of liberation, have been subverted to create a state of perpetual distraction. Information overload, instant gratification, quantified social validation, all these aspects of the contemporary digital experience serve to fragment consciousness, preventing the emergence of the kind of sustained attention necessary for true spiritual awakening. The ancient Gnostic descriptions of archons intercepting and distorting the divine light find a perfect parallel in the luminous screens that now dominate our attention. The archons operate through hierarchical social structures that mirror their own distorted cosmic order. Political, economic, and religious systems that concentrate power and promote competition over cooperation reflect and reinforce the archontic influence in the human world. The artificial creation of scarcity on a naturally abundant planet, the normalization of war, the acceptance of poverty as inevitable. All these aspects of our societies represent the materialization of the archontic program on the human plane. Isn't it strange how we accept as normal systems that clearly don't serve the well-being of the majority of beings? A particularly insidious archontic tactic is the inversion of values, turning virtues into vices and vices into virtues. Thus, empathy is labeled as weakness, ruthless competition celebrated as strength. Material accumulation is exalted while generosity is viewed with suspicion. Questioning is discouraged while blind obedience is rewarded. This inversion creates a world where those who adapt most completely to the unnatural system are considered successful, while those who resist its distorted values are marginalized, pathologized, or criminalized. Archons are not just metaphorical concepts, but, according to Gnostic cosmology, real entities that can interact directly with the human psyche. Esoteric texts describe how they can influence thoughts, implant artificial desires, and even temporarily possess those whose psychic defenses are compromised. Contemporary experiences of psychic interference, intrusive voices, and unexplained self-destructive impulses find parallels in ancient descriptions of archontic attacks. Practices of psychic protection and energetic purification, present in worldwide spiritual traditions, were developed precisely to defend against these influences. In the collective dimension, the archons operate through what the Gnostics called egregores, collective thought forms that gain autonomy and power through the attention and emotional energy of large human groups. Fanatical political ideologies, religious fundamentalisms, celebrity cults, militaristic national identities, all can function as vehicles for archontic influence on a social scale. The defining characteristic of these egregores is their ability to superimpose artificial identities over authentic consciousness, leading people to carry out actions that they would normally consider unthinkable when identified with the group. The most effective resistance against the archontic system begins with awareness of its existence. Like psychic parasites, they depend on the ignorance of their hosts to operate freely. Simply understanding their methods and motivations is already an act of liberation, creating the necessary detachment to observe their patterns operating in our own psyche and in the social world. This doesn't mean developing paranoia or victimhood, but cultivating a vigilant clarity that allows us to recognize and neutralize attempts at manipulation. After all, what power can a prisoner hold who has clearly seen the walls of his cell and understood the nature of his jailers? The most audacious claim of the Gnostic texts, the one that provoked relentless persecution, was that the God presented in the Old Testament was not the true supreme being, but YALDABAOTH, the usurping demiurge. The Gnostics pointed to the descriptions of a God who displays human emotions such as anger, jealousy, and revenge, who demands bloody sacrifices, who severely punishes the search for knowledge, who declares himself unique when the scriptures themselves mention other divine entities. From the Gnostic perspective, these inconsistencies reveal the true limited nature of this entity, incapable of manifesting the attributes of perfection, unconditional compassion, and omniscience that would characterize an authentic divinity. Knowledge of this truth has been systematically suppressed throughout history, not only through the physical destruction of Gnostic texts, but also by sophisticated theological reinterpretation that has transformed obvious contradictions into divine mysteries that should not be questioned. The institutionalization of religion served as the perfect mechanism for this control, replacing the direct experience of the divine with codified rituals, priestly intermediaries, and canonized texts whose interpretation is rigidly controlled. Have you ever wondered why so many religious traditions discourage direct questioning of their fundamental premises? By comparatively analyzing various world religious traditions, we have detected a revealing pattern. The original mystics, the esoteric currents within each religion, often converge on similar conclusions to the Gnostic ones, while the official exoteric structures diverge radically from each other. The Sufis in Islam, the Kabbalists in Judaism, Christian mystics like Master Eckhart and Jacob Boehme, the Advaits in Hinduism, all describe experiences of a divinity that completely transcends the anthropomorphic and limited descriptions found in conventional religious texts. This universality of direct mystical experience suggests an access to a reality that institutionalized religions often conceal. The concept of the fall, present in various religious mythologies, takes on a radically different meaning in the Gnostic interpretation. Far from representing a human moral transgression against a perfect creator, the original fall was cosmic. It occurred when the divine spark was imprisoned in matter by the demiurge. The Eden narrative, reinterpreted, reveals a story of frustrated liberation. The serpent representing divine wisdom trying to awaken human consciousness, while the god of the garden tried to keep Adam and Eve in a state of docile ignorance. The knowledge of good and evil, the capacity for discernment, was the first step towards human liberation, not the cause of their punishment. The numerous ethical contradictions present in the sacred texts, particularly in the Abrahamic scriptures, acquire new meaning in the light of Gnostic cosmology. The divine commands for tribal genocides, the sanctioning of slavery, the treatment of women as property, the glorification of violence against infidels, all these problematic elements reflect not the will of a perfect being, but the whims of a limited, territorial, and insecure entity. Theological attempts to justify these passages through historical contextualizations or allegorical interpretations often end up in logical contortions that reveal the underlying discomfort with these issues. A particularly effective strategy of religious control identified by the Gnostics was the creation of an existential guilt based on the concept of original sin. By convincing human beings that they are inherently flawed and in need of external redemption, institutionalized religions create psychological dependence on their mediating structures. By comparison, spiritual traditions that have escaped the direct influence of the demiurgic paradigm, such as certain currents of Buddhism, Taoism, and indigenous traditions, tend to emphasize the intrinsic goodness or neutrality of human nature, offering practices of self-discovery rather than external salvation. The Gnostic Gospels, such as the Gospel of Thomas, preserve sayings of Jesus that are radically different from those found in the canonical texts, teachings that emphasize inner divinity, direct access to divine knowledge, and the illusion of the material world. The kingdom of heaven is within you, and know thyself and thou shalt know the divine represent fundamental principles that directly challenge the need for an intermediary church. Isn't it surprising that these texts, many dating back to the first Christian generations, were deliberately excluded from the official canon in favor of those that emphasized hierarchical structures and institutional authority? Theological structures that promote rigid dualities, heaven/hell, saved/condemned, faithful/unfaithful, reflect the archontic divide and conquer mentality. These artificial polarizations create systems of inclusion/exclusion that fragment humanity, preventing the perception of our essential unity. The concept of an eternal hell as punishment for temporal errors, a notion absent from the original Hebrew scriptures, perfectly illustrates the vindictive distortion introduced into religious thinking to install fear as a control mechanism. Considering a true divine principle of infinite compassion, how could such a concept correspond to ultimate reality? Historical evidence reveals that many of the rituals, festive dates, and even central theological elements of the major religions were adapted directly from earlier pagan traditions, often with completely altered original meanings. Solstices transformed into divine birth dates, fertility goddesses converted into asexual virgins, symbols of expanded consciousness reinterpreted as representations of submission. This systematic re-engineering of meanings has served to disconnect humanity from traditions that promoted a more direct and natural relationship with the cosmos and its cycles. The promise of posthumous reward, a paradise attainable only after death and only through adherence to specific rules, represents one of the most effective tools of the demiurgic religious system. This deferred proposition effectively neutralizes the impulse for radical transformation in the present life, channeling spiritual energy into a future hope while maintaining acceptance of the current status quo. In contrast, the Gnostic traditions and other genuine mystical currents emphasize the possibility of liberation during the present life, through the transformation of consciousness and immediate experiential reality, a direct threat to the perpetual postponement offered by the system. The fundamental principle of Gnostic liberation lies in the understanding that, despite the soul's imprisonment in the demiurgic system, our deepest essence, the divine spark or pneuma, remains untouched and incorruptible. This spark is not a personal possession, but our true identity beyond the ego, connected directly to the pleroma, the divine fullness. The Nag Hammadi codices describe this spark as the inextinguishable luminosity, present in every human being regardless of their beliefs or actions. Recognizing this inner presence is the first step towards authentic liberation. For how could a prison contain that which is, in its essence, limitless? Gnosis, a Greek word meaning knowledge, but not ordinary intellectual knowledge, represents the direct and transformative experience of ultimate reality. Unlike faith based on external authorities, Gnosis is experiential, visceral, and personal. It is the moment of absolute clarity when illusions dissolve and we directly perceive both the nature of the prison and our true identity beyond it. In this sense, Gnostic awakening resembles Zen Satori, Advaita realization, or the enlightenment described in various genuine mystical traditions. Have you ever experienced moments of sudden clarity, when reality seems momentarily transparent, revealing something much deeper? The path to spiritual freedom requires systematic disidentification with the structures imposed by the demiurgic system, from social and cultural identities to material attachments, and even the psychological ego built up through socialization. This process doesn't involve hostile rejection, but compassionate transcendence, understanding that these structures are temporary tools, not our true essence. Like an actor who remembers that he is playing a role, we maintain functionality in the world while internally remaining free of its limiting definitions. This state of being in the world, but not of the world, represents the Gnostic ideal of freedom in life. Specific contemplative practices have been preserved in various esoteric traditions to facilitate this liberation. Meditation that cultivates silent witness, non-reactive observation of thoughts, emotions, and sensations, gradually dissolves automatic identification with the mental flow. Lucid dream work develops the ability to maintain consciousness in states beyond the physical, preparing the soul to navigate consciously after physical death, avoiding archontic traps. Advanced breathing techniques alter the brain's biochemistry, opening portals of perception normally blocked by the perceptual filters imposed by demiurgic programming. Gnostic liberation is not limited to the individual sphere, but encompasses an essential collective dimension. After all, we are all interconnected in the great web of consciousness, and each mind that awakens facilitates the process for others. The Gnostic manuscripts speak of syzygies, spiritual partnerships that amplify the power of liberation, and ecclesias, communities of seekers that create energetic fields capable of repelling archontic influences. In the contemporary era, these connections transcend geographical limitations, forming global networks of awakened consciousness that serve as beacons for other navigators in the turbulent waters of collective illusion. The authentic relationship with knowledge represents another crucial aspect of spiritual freedom. The demiurgic system promotes two main distortions: naive credulity that accepts external authorities without question, and cynical skepticism that rejects any transcendent possibility. The Gnostic path navigates between these extremes, cultivating acute discernment, the sword of discrimination, that distinguishes truth from manipulation. This discernment is not based solely on intellectual analysis, but integrates intuition, bodily resonance, and emotional clarity, using the whole human being as an instrument of perception. Understanding the cycles of incarnation provides essential perspective for the work of liberation. According to Gnostic texts such as Pistis Sophia, the soul that does not achieve Gnosis during life remains vulnerable after physical death, drawn back into the cycle of reincarnation through specific access points guarded by archons. These entities exploit unresolved desires, fears, and attachments to induce a return to the material prison. Recognizing these dynamics allows for conscious preparation for the transition process, developing the clarity and determination needed to navigate beyond the spheres of archontic influence when the time comes. The alchemical transmutation of emotions represents a sophisticated spiritual technology for liberation. Dense emotions such as fear, anger, and desire, often used by archons for manipulation, contain tremendous potential energy which, when worked on consciously, can be refined into heightened states of consciousness. This process does not involve repression, which only strengthens the archontic control over the psyche, but conscious transformation. Anger is transmuted into assertive clarity, fear into alert presence, desire into unconditional love. This inner alchemy literally changes the vibrational frequency of the being, gradually making it impervious to the low-frequency influences that sustain the control system. Conscious creation represents the highest expression of spiritual freedom, not just freeing oneself from existing illusions, but actively participating in the manifestation of new realities. The Gnostics understood that the awakened human consciousness possesses divine-like creative power, capable of shaping the substance of reality through focused intention, clear visualization, and heightened emotional state. This creative capacity has been deliberately obscured by the demiurgic system, which seeks to keep humans as passive consumers of prefabricated reality, rather than sovereign creators of their experiences. Recovering this innate power represents a spiritual revolution with profound implications for the entire existential matrix. Ultimate freedom transcends all dualities, including the apparent opposition between demiurge and pleroma. In the highest state of Gnostic realization, one understands that even the demiurgic system ultimately serves the evolution of consciousness, providing the necessary friction for the awakening of the dormant divine spark. Like the lotus that blossoms from the mud, the realized consciousness emerges from the limitations that initially seemed to imprison it. From this supreme perspective, all of creation, including its apparent distortions, reveals itself as a multidimensional expression of infinite consciousness exploring all its possibilities. This understanding does not negate the work of liberation, but places it within a cosmic context where even the most convincing illusion paradoxically serves the ultimate awakening. The veil of illusion grows thinner by the day, as more people intuit the inconsistencies in the official narrative of reality and seek deeper answers. The fact that you are here, contemplating these possibilities, suggests that the divine spark within you is activating, recognizing truths that transcend social conditioning and imposed limitations. The journey to complete liberation can be challenging, but you don't travel it alone. In every corner of the world, minds and hearts are awakening to the same fundamental realization. We are so much more than we were led to believe. If you're interested in exploring more about spirituality, I've specially selected for you some videos full of profound insights and fascinating discoveries that you'll love. Just click on one of them. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of self-discovery and spiritual learning. Your commitment to knowledge is the first step towards transforming your reality.